Weston Babock's Hamlet, A Tragedy of Errors, is a re-examination of Shakespeare's canonical tragedy, framing its catastrophic narrative as the culmination of a series of interconnected human errors, rather than the machinations of fate or the inevitable downfall of a tragic hero. Published by Purdue University Press, Babock's study diverges from mid-20th century critical trends that often emphasized psychological or moral interpretations of Hamlet's character, instead positioning the play as a meticulous chronicle of misjudgments, miscommunications, and moral failings. By shifting the lens from Hamlet's internal struggles to the broader web of errors enacted by nearly every major character, Babock argues that the tragedy arises not from a single fatal flaw, but from a collective collapse of reason and ethical responsibility. This approach reframes Hamlet as a cautionary tale about the fragility of human judgment and the cascading consequences of seemingly minor mistakes. Babock's analysis begins by challenging the Romantic and Freudian readings that dominated earlier scholarship, particularly the notion of Hamlet as an indecisive figure paralyzed by Oedipal guilt or existential angst. Instead, he posits that Hamlet's hesitation to act is but one thread in a tapestry of errors woven by the play's ensemble. Claudius's regicide and subsequent cover-up, Polonius's manipulative scheming, Gertrude's moral complacency, and Laertes's rash vengeance are all accorded equal weight in Babock's diagnosis of Elsinore's downfall. This democratization of blame underscores his thesis: the tragedy is systemic, rooted in a court culture marked by deceit, ambition, and ethical decay. Babock's Hamlet, far from a brooding intellectual, emerges as a reactive figure whose attempts to navigate this corrupt environment only compound the chaos, as his own errors such as the accidental killing of Polonius and his cruel treatment of Ophelia accelerate the spiral toward violence. Errors in Hamlet are not merely personal failings, but structural elements of the play's design. He traces how Shakespeare engineers dramatic irony through recurring motifs of spying, eavesdropping, and misinterpretation. For instance, Polonius's decision to hide behind the arras in Gertrude's chamber, a literal and metaphorical act of concealment, leads directly to his death, which in turn fuels Leetz's vengeful rage. Similarly, Claudius's attempt to eavesdrop on Hamlet's confrontation with Gertrude mirrors his broader political strategy of surveillance and manipulation, a tactic that ultimately backfires as Hamlet uncovers his guilt. Babock highlights how these repetitions create a claustrophobic atmosphere in which characters, trapped in cycles of suspicion and retaliation, become architects of their own ruin. The play's famous mousetrap scene, in which Hamlet stages the murder of Gonzago to provoke Claudius, epitomizes this dynamic. What begins as a strategic attempt to expose a truth becomes yet another error, as Hamlet's public accusation destabilizes the court and hastens the climax. Babock's reading also interrogates the role of language as both a tool and a trap. He dissects the character's propensity for rhetorical evasion, double entendre, and outright falsehood, arguing that their inability to communicate authentically exacerbates the tragedy. Claudius's manipulative oratory, Polonius's circuitous speeches, and Hamlet's own penchant for wordplay are all scrutinized as manifestations of a courtly culture that privileges appearance over substance. Even Hamlet's soliloquies, traditionally interpreted as moments of profound introspection, are reframed by Barb as exercises in self-deception, wherein the prince rationalizes his inaction or deflects responsibility. This linguistic analysis extends to the play's pivotal moments, such as the ambiguous exchange between Hamlet and Ophelia in the nunnery scene, which Babock reads as a tragic miscommunication fueled by mutual distrust and societal pressures. By foregrounding language's capacity to obscure rather than clarify, Babock aligns Hamlet with early modern anxieties about the reliability of speech and the dangers of misinterpretation. While Babock's focus remains tightly trained on the text, his methodology subtly engages with the new critical principles ascendant in the 1960s, privileging close reading and internal coherence over biographical or historical context. However, he occasionally nods to the play's Elizabethan milieu, noting how themes of political instability and moral corruption resonate with contemporary anxieties about succession and courtly intrigue. Babock's refusal to reduce the tragedy to a single cause or character reflects a nuanced understanding of Shakespeare's complexity, even as his emphasis on collective error risks downplaying the play's metaphysical dimensions, the haunting presence of the ghost, the existential weight of Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy, and the overarching tension between divine justice and human agency. Critics might argue that Babock's secular, human-centric interpretation overlooks the spiritual and cosmic frameworks that Shakespeare embeds within the narrative. Babock's study invites reconsideration in light of postmodern and post-structuralist critiques, which might further deconstruct the notion of error itself or interrogate the cultural biases underlying his interpretation. Yet the book's enduring value lies in its bold reorientation of Hamlet's tragic mechanism, challenging readers to view the play not as the story of a lone hero's downfall, but as a collective unraveling of vision that underscores the perennial relevance of Shakespeare's exploration of human fallibility. By illuminating the intricate web of mistakes that ensnares Elsinore, Babock reminds us that tragedy, in life as in art, is seldom the result of a single misstep, but rather the accumulation of choices made in error, in fear, and in the desperate hope of evading the inevitable.